certainly enjoy bringing back our good friend Steve Gardner from USA Today on the Boardwalk on the hotline for a couple moments, talk a little baseball with the Phillies with a big trade. And Steve, always good to talk to you. How you been, friend?
Good, Rich. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. What was your at first glance? We talked a little bit about the Phillies maybe trying to get Santana off the books, or at least make a play and move him. And I love the move by the Philadelphia Phillies because I think they found the perfect suitor in Seattle. So talk a little bit about handicap that move and what did you think?
Yeah, most definitely. The Carlos Santana, getting him somewhere else, and even if you paid part of his contract, I think that's huge for the Phillies because it opens up that first base spot where Rhys Hoskins has to play. You can't have another season with him in the outfield. He just, he gives it his all, but he's just so much better playing at first base than he is in the outfield. So I thought that was number one. And the second part is Segura is an excellent guy to pick up because you don't you cover your bases to where if you don't get a Machado, you still have a shortstop, but you can still get Machado because Segura can play shortstop or second base, or if you can convince Machado to play third base, you can do that as well, and your team still has that flexibility to be able to fit Manny in there in either spot, or if he goes elsewhere, you're covered at shortstop, and you can still go after the big fish in Bryce Harper.
Yeah, and I kind of joked the other day. I said, if anything, Santana, he should kind of commend his agent for getting that type of money. And it just, listen, at the end of the day, the numbers 229, 24 home runs, 86 ribbies in 2018. We know he's a notoriously slow starter. I think they just wanted to go in a different direction. And as far as Crawford, I just didn't think he was going to be a fit. I think they saw a young kid that struggled a little bit, had some injuries, and maybe just wasn't, quote, ready, so to speak. And I still think the kid might have a nice career in the bigs, but it just showed me that anytime you're getting rid of first round, a player a couple years ago that you just drafted, that's you got to package a piece like that. You just have to when you're making a move like this.
And remember, too, Rich, the Phillies farm system a few years ago was not that highly thought of, but Crawford was one of the guys that was coming up through the system that was kind of highlighted as the cream of the crop, and he did excel in the minor leagues, but once he got to the majors, maybe the learning curve was a little bit too much, and as you said, he could eventually turn into a fine major league player, but that wasn't going to happen. It didn't look like with Philadelphia, so good for them to at least get somebody who had some value and package that all together. And yeah, Seattle, certainly Jerry DiPoto there, the GM, loves making trades, and the Phillies were anxious to make one, and they found one that worked for both teams.
Seattle enjoys making trades with NL East teams. I mean, how about the move with Diaz and Cano, cash considerations? The Mets officially announced, and they introduced those two players. You get rid of Swarzak, a couple prospects, including Batista and Jay Bruce. I love this move, not so much Cano, but Diaz to me. I mean, Cano, you bring in instant credibility. He understands the New York market. You could have argued if he didn't get hit with the suspension. I thought he was a Hall of Famer, at least Hall of Fame talent with his resume and his career. But to me, I'm if you're a Met fan, I would be a little more excited about the Diaz move.
Yeah, I think both will help them tremendously in the coming season, and maybe next year, Cano, his drop off has not been as a lot of the players as they age, they tend to drop off quickly. He's not done that, so I think he's got a couple more good years left in him, certainly. And the Diaz move, yeah, one of the best young closers in all of baseball. He was fantastic last year, and I know you don't want to put too much emphasis on a closer who's only going to come in and pitch in 60 games or whatever, but he does give them some certainty at the back end of the bullpen, And I think for a Mets team that, getting those wins on the board and not blowing late leads, I think is important for them. So when you're trying to build back up and, the NL East all of a sudden is the super competitive division, you've got to make bold moves, and the Mets did that.
Oh, absolutely. Think about this. The Mets won 77 games last year. The Phillies won 80 games. They teetered off the last month plus. But by this acquisition, by acquiring these type of players, you're probably looking at plus 5 to 7 wins right off the bat. So that puts them right in contention there, along with Atlanta, who won 90. And then you have Washington. And I was a little surprised. Corbin spurns the Yankees. Major contract with the Nationals now. You got Donaldson in Atlanta. We already documented the moves by the Phillies and the Mets. So the NL East, it's extremely competitive going into the season. What are your thoughts on the Corbin move, the Corbin signing with Washington? Did they overpay?
I think they did, but in terms of years, I don't think anybody was willing to give him that 6th year on the contract. He's entering his age 30 season right now, so you see where that takes him up to 35. But I think the Nationals needed to make some sort of a move to bolster that starting rotation and get somebody else in there with Scherzer and Strasburg. And I was surprised that they aimed as high as they did. I mean, Corbin was the consensus number one pitcher on the free agent market. The Phillies were very, very interested in him. As you said, the Yankees were very, very interested in him, and he was interested in them. But Washington simply came in and outbid them, gave him a 6th year. And I think this is one of those decisions for – I look at John Lester when he signed with the Cubs several years ago. I mean, they got several excellent seasons from him, and as the contract is aging, it's not looking so good. But the Nationals are in a win-now mode, and I think really it would have been – if you could go back and turn your crystal ball and say, here's how things were turning out, it would have been best for the Nationals if they could have had one more year of Dusty Baker to coincide with one more year of Bryce Harper. But it didn't work out that way, and now they're transitioning. Again, I don't think Bryce Harper is in play for the Nationals this offseason. They can try and do whatever they want and save face and put a nice offer out there, but I just don't think they're going to be willing to pay what it takes. And now that they've signed Patrick Corbin to the big deal, I think it's even more obvious that Bryce Harper will not be a National next year.
Interesting take and thought there with Baker. We talked about it during the season, if that was contributing to their struggles. And maybe you wonder if Baker was still the manager, the type of influence he would have in reselling Harper on coming back with the Nationals. I was a little surprised the Yankees weren't going to budge here. They went 5 for 100. Corbin agrees to 6 for 140. To me, I think it's a huge swing and a miss by the Yankees. So I think what they're going to do right now is they got to pivot, and they probably got to go back after J.A. Happ. And I think, if anything, he's probably going to earn about a 3 or 4 year deal in this market.
Yep, I think Happ is probably, they know him, they've seen him, they know what they'd be getting, and at this point, they need the left-hander. They would like to have had Corbin, I think, as their first choice, but Happ is reasonable and a solid target, and it looks like I think they would take him or would look to pursue him ahead of Dallas Keuchel, who's also out there. But I'm kind of surprised that the Yankees' money didn't talk and didn't give Corbin, a lifelong Yankees fan growing up, and all of that. The connection there wasn't enough actually when it came down to the final deal.
All right, 12:40 on a Wednesday. Steve Gardner joining us on the Boardwalk Kind of Hotline. Does a great job covering baseball for USA Today. Let me give you a team that I think is a wild card / dark horse for Bryce Harper. And that's a team that I think has struggled over the last several years, would love to turn around and kind of take the back page back, if you will, in their hometown. How about the White Sox?
The White Sox have been interesting, and they've come up a few times in the last week or so. I understand if you're going to do a complete teardown and start rebuilding from the ground up, which, the White Sox in getting rid of Chris Sale and Adam Eaton and all of the big trades that they made, they've got a nice foundation there. You throw Bryce Harper on top of that, and all of a sudden you've got to pay attention to them. And the AL Central is certainly a division that doesn't have a whole lot of competition outside of the Cleveland Indians, who have won, the last several years. So it's an interesting idea for the White Sox. I just wonder if they can sell Bryce Harper on their vision when he's got, they've got competition from the big market teams like the Dodgers and the Cubs and the Yankees. I don't know if he listens as carefully to them as he might to those other teams.
I kind of find it interesting, too, that they send Jim Thome out there. He flew out to Vegas, right? It was the pitch.
Yep.
It kind of, to me, it's funny because I remember when the Phillies were making the pitch for Jim Thome, and listen, the first year, that ballpark was absolutely electric. And say what you want, that kind of started bringing back that winning culture, so to speak. And then they had, obviously, sure, it put Howard on the back burner for a couple years because Thome was playing first, but still, it gave a little more juice in Philly, and it started to provide that juice, that spark. Okay, we can be competitive, we can win some games, we can attract a free agent. I'm just wondering, having a guy like that who's been through it before, he's probably the best person to go out and talk to a guy like Bryce Harper and make that pitch.
Yes, exactly right. And, you could see the same sort of thing you could say happened in Washington when they overpaid for Jason Worth, or Pudge Rodriguez in Detroit, when the Tigers had come off that historically bad 100-plus loss season. So there is some appeal, and I think that's probably the selling point that Thome used in being the guy who everybody looks to as that was the turning point in a franchise history.
You, when I was tweeting back and forth with you the other day, you said for the Phillies, you got to make this push now. If you're going to make the push for Machado, I mean, if you actually think about it, if you look at bringing in an all-star shortstop, you've got Hoskins at first, Hernandez at second. You still got Franco at third. And I had a couple people call up yesterday, and they said they don't want to give up on Franco. Well, you obviously know if you're going to make that push for Machado, what do you have to sell him on? You got to sell him on playing third base.
Yeah, unless you're going to move Hernandez somehow and trade him and slip Segura over to second base. I think that's a possibility.
Is that a sticking point, though? Is that the biggest? Because Machado has said multiple times, I want to play shortstop. Do you really think that's a true sticking point?
Until he says otherwise, yes, I do. And, it may be, I could be completely wrong, but I still think if you're a premier guy and you have your choice of where you want to go at whatever, however many millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars they're going to pay you, that if you want to be the star and you want to be the guy, I think just like Derek Jeter wasn't going to be moved off shortstop, I don't think Manny Machado wants to play any other position besides shortstop. And maybe somebody can convince him otherwise, but until I see it, that's the way that I'm going to read the situation.
All right, lastly, before I let you get out of here, I mentioned this name to you several times. I've talked about it on the air, Madison Bumgarner. I think there's a trade market for him. I think there's several teams out there. Do you think the Phillies can be a serious player for Bumgarner? Because, again, you got a lefty. He's a starting pitcher. We know what he's done in the postseason. His track record speaks for itself. I just, you add him into that mix and that starting rotation. To me, it's a major, major upgrade.
I think so, except there's some hidden things in Bumgarner. I mean, the velocity decrease came and didn't come back after his injury, the dirt bike injury that derailed the season. It didn't come back, and he hasn't been the pitcher that we saw in the postseason and be so dominant. He hasn't been that dominant. He's lost a little bit off the fastball, and the metrics, the advanced metrics, are not as kind to him. I don't know. It depends on what you give up to get him. And I can see the lure of getting someone who's proven in the postseason, can give you that kind of leadership. But I think you really have to take a look at what you're giving up to get him when you put a trade package together. I love the guy. I think his outlook on the game and his mental game and his tenacity are fabulous. I think it would rub off on the rest of the team. But how effective will he be, and for how long? I think that's a question that's still up in the air.
Now, I understand it wasn't a trade, but I'm just wondering if in the back of the Phillies' mind, okay, well, we kind of went a route with a guy that, reports were losing a little bit on the fastball, maybe doesn't have his peak stuff anymore, and Jake Arrieta. Now, I know he was a free agent, so we're not talking trade, but do you think that also factors into them when they look at a player like Gardner, even though, again, the postseason, the track record, injuries aside, it does speak for itself?
Yeah, I think that's probably something. I mean, that's the kind of player that they thought they were getting, and they got with Jake Arrieta. And yeah, he was a Cy Young Award winner just a couple of years ago, but yet you would never know that by the performance that he put up this past season. You got to worry about pitchers and their aging curves. Like I said with Patrick Corbin, he was fantastic last year, top 5 in strikeouts and everything. But how many more years are you going to get from him? We may see, the Yankees and the Phillies and the teams that lost out on him in a couple of years say, wow, we dodged a bullet.
That's a great point. All right, it's heating up, which is good because we're getting snow down here in Jersey, and it's kind of annoying, to be quite honest with you. So always appreciate the insight. I think you take Washington off the table with Harper, but I'll tell you the next week or two is going to be fascinating when it comes to those two players because I think everyone's waiting with anticipation to see where they're going to sign, right? Who's going to come in and scoop them up? I
think Machado signs first, and Harper holds out probably until the new year, and then the price will just go skyrocket.
Yeah, that's true. 400, 500. I mean, geez, what do they care? All right, listen, you have a great weekend. We'll talk next week. Always appreciate a couple of moments, my friend. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rich.
All right, you got it. Steve Gardner, fantastic job. Join us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline.